Good morning, everybody. This is Omar Serrata with the Tilted Lawyer podcast. For all of you with small children who had the honor of celebrating Halloween with them last night, going out trick-or-treating and doing the whole costume thing, I'm sorry for this morning. I know how you feel. I feel like I've been hit by a bus. It was a lot of alcohol. It was a lot of sugar, candy, shenanigans, trick-or-treaters. Man, my block shuts down the entire block. It's like a block party, a Halloween block party. And that's how we do it in Halloween. But never mind that. You guys are here for the Delphi trial. The prosecution has rested their case. They're done presenting evidence. And they rested in one of the most haphazard ways that you could possibly imagine after losing on an objection, trying to introduce a prejudicial bit of video that sought to, I guess, represent how not out of his mind Richard Allen was. It backfired tremendously. And there's been a lot of questions about why they ended it that way without, some kind of redeeming aspect of that testimony. But it is what it is. We're 15 days in a trial, and we're no further towards securing all of the answers to all of the many questions that remain in this case. I'm going to break some of those down. I'm going to talk about the prosecution's spectacular smear video backfire. I'm going to talk about Dr. Walla's account. There's been a lot of thoughts surrounding that. We're going to talk about the white van confession and whether or not that opened the door to possible third-party culpability evidence being presented in the defense's case in chief. I want to talk about Brad Weber. I got some thoughts about that effing guy. What is the deal with the Google search evidence? Why was the jury just allowed to look at that without any kind of tie-in to an expert witness or otherwise? And then we're going to just talk about, strengths and weaknesses of the prosecution's case, because there's a lot of holes. That's it. There's a lot of holes, man. So you're going to want to strap in. It's going to be a good one.
Whatever you might be going through and wherever you might be, this is Omar Serrata with the Tilted Lawyer podcast. I'm here to take your mind off of things. Yes, I'm an attorney. No, I'm not giving you legal advice. We're going to sit and talk like people, as these are the candid thoughts of one practicing attorney, and it's after hours. So have a seat. Feel free to have a drink and join me. Let's get started.
All right, so all of you who have been following the Delphi case, there's been this growing frustration with the fact that you have one of the biggest trials of the past 25 years. And for whatever reason, in spite of all of the speculation and conspiracy theories and unease that has surrounded the county and law enforcement over there, the judge has decided that this trial isn't going to be televised. It's led us to have limited information. Some of it is flat out wrong information. I'm relying on sources that I trust. And the main source that I trust is Andrea Burkhart, who has put her career on hold to go to trial every single day. And she's been offering these 5 and 6 hour videos every single day about her observations of trial. And so I'm relying on her heavily. I'm also aware that not all of you have like 30 hours in a week to devote to going through that detailed of analysis. So I've tried to summarize it as best I can. It's difficult in a case of this magnitude because there's a lot going on. I'm focusing on what's come out in the last couple of days because so much of this case is just completely head-scratching. I had some thoughts. I went through some of my thoughts prior to trial in this case. We had a timeline that largely has remained in place. The timeline being on the day of the murders on February 13th of 2017. Kelsey, Libby's sister, plans to sleep in. The girls are already up. Kelsey has plans to go visit her boyfriend. Schools were not even in session. The girls had a sleepover the night before. She takes the girls to the bridge. They arrive at 1:40 the last time Kelsey would see Abby or her sister Libby ever again would have been at that time. The girls enter the part of a small county road, somehow make it onto a bridge. Nobody was supposed to be on that bridge, but they were. It was supposed to be off limits to the public, but it was a place that they had visited regularly. And if you saw pictures of the bridge, I mean, there's like no railing on it. The ties were rotting. Like you could step in, it's like your foot would almost basically go through. There were some planks of wood that were missing. Extremely dangerous. Not anything that, as a grown adult, that you would venture to go on voluntarily, but as children, of course, Around 3:30, Derek calls grandma, indicating that the girls weren't returning phone calls. Kelsey has a couple missed calls from her grandma. Carrie Williams, Libby's mom, wasn't at all that worried at first. We talked about Odin theories, the theory that somehow this occult or this religious group, the Odinists, were involved in the murders. None of that has really panned out at trial because of the way that the judge has limited the defense's ability to go into third-party culpability. The question is whether or not the door has been opened for them to examine that a little bit based on what happened at trial. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what the trial has been based around in terms of at least the timeline. We have to talk about the video. This is how trial ends. So day 15 of trial, the prosecution introduced a video from the Cass County Jail depicting Allen in a highly agitated state as part of their redirect of a witness. And this video was intended to counter the defense's argument that Allen's prison confessions were unreliable because of his mental state. And I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, obviously I haven't seen the video, but it's like, obviously he was in his right mind. Look at him carrying on and screaming and shouting and doing all of these things. That was their counter to everything. But it backfires spectacularly during cross. The prosecution, they wanted to demonstrate that Allen's behavior in the Cass County Jail video contradicted the defense's claims that Allen was calm and cooperative while in prison. And in the course of doing that, pardon me while I am bigging my notes here so I can see what I wrote down. They wanted to contradict the defense's assertion that he was just calm, cooperative guy, for all intents and purposes, being cooperative. While at the same time arguing that he was also not of his right mind, deteriorated mental state because he had been in basically solitary confinement in a maximum security prison for an extended amount of time. We talked in my last video about the Reed technique and the coercive torture, psychological torture that he's been forced to endure as part of this case. So in this video, it was supposed to be video of Allen screaming, yelling, behaving erratically. They sought to, they wanted to show that, just to show it, because somehow that was going to be the big contradiction. Even though it kind of fit into the defensive narrative, if you're going through a state of mental deterioration, it would stand to reason that there might be moments where you might be losing your shit like that with whatever was shown on that video. So the defense objects immediately to the video's relevance. They argue that its prejudicial value outweighed any probative value. That's the classic 403, which is, look, the video's not relevant. And even if it were, the probative value of the contents of the evidence for the jury is going to be far outweighed by how much they're going to be prejudiced by seeing Richard Allen in such a state. And in this case, the judge agreed. The defense argued that the video was simply a smear tactic intended to make Allen look bad in front of the jury, which, yeah, probably it was, because it doesn't make much sense as a contradiction video because the defense was kind of playing both sides of it. On the one hand, there were periods of time where he was cooperative and, polite and calm. And then there were other periods of time where he was losing his shit, drinking the toilet water, smearing feces on himself, eating it, confessing to murders that he didn't commit, according to them, confessing to the murders to Dr. Walla and other members of law enforcement, multiple occasions to his mom, to his wife, all of these things. The defense argues that that is a symptom of his mental deterioration. And so when you're playing both sides of it, logically, you have periods of mental deterioration with obvious symptoms, and you have other periods where the symptoms aren't so obvious. And so we're just going to cherry pick and show this one video where he's freaking out. And what is that even going to show? We're conceding that his behavior was erratic. So what is the probative value of it? Like, what purpose does it serve in this trial? The judge rules. She initially takes the video under advisement and then reviews it in chambers, as they do. And after reviewing the video, the judge ultimately sustains the defense's objection, rules the video is inadmissible for the reasons that the defense team had objected to. It's just not relevant enough to overcome the prejudicial effect that it would have on the jury if we were to admit it into this case. So, although the video wasn't admitted into evidence, the prosecution attempts to introduce that it had significant repercussions, but the defense, by all accounts, skillfully uses the prosecution's failed attempt to their advantage, highlighting the prosecution's desperation and resorting to smear videos, trying to salvage their case. They pointed out that the video had nothing to do with Allen's mental state at the time of his alleged confessions, which is 100% true. They emphasized the prosecution's lack of preparation, as they were apparently surprised that the defense had not seen the video prior to its introduction. Yeah, that's another thing. Whenever you try to introduce videos that were not for the purpose of impeachment, which I guess arguably they're going to say that maybe it was, there was this whole kerfluffle at trial about, wait a minute, what is this video? What is this? I've never seen this video. And the judge is saying, like, you know what? We're going to take the morning. You're going to have some time to review it, whatever. Obviously, they're pissed off. We're sitting here day 15 of trial. You're trying to introduce a video against my client that we've been litigating this case for a couple of years now. This is the first I'm hearing about it. That's bullshit. Complete bullshit. Does it speak to desperation? Does it speak to their lack of preparation? I'm not so sure about that. I think it was something that they had in their back pocket. I think that there was probably a time and a place to try to introduce that video evidence, but the way that it came out and what they offered it for didn't make a whole ton of sense. And it's impossible to know right now for sure how the jury is perceiving what happened. You know, it's always difficult because, look, I always have the belief that whenever you're in a jury trial, the jury is going to find somebody to trust. It just goes back to the Jerry Spence handbook of how to conduct a trial. You have to be the person that the juries are relying upon for information in the case, because they're supposed to be the truth finders. They need to figure out who is more likely to tell them the truth. And if one side appears unprepared, if one side appears desperate, if one person is objecting too much, that could be perceived by a jury as maybe that we're touching upon weaknesses in their case that they're trying to cover up. There's like a million different psychological things that you got to be aware of on how it impacts the jury. And it's impossible to know right now how the jury would have viewed an exchange like that. But Andrea Burkhart suggests that the prosecution's attempt to introduce the video may have backfired based on what she saw as she observed the jurors when that was all going down. So there was that. The other thing to highlight was Dr. Walla. I think that was day 14 of trial. She is a clinical psychologist at Westville Correctional Facility. She testified that while Richard Allen was under her care, he confessed. Now, remember on my last video, just to bring it back a little bit, I told you guys that it's not all that important that Richard Allen confessed, because of course he did multiple times and nobody's disputing that. The only question that I really had was, what part of those confessions contained information that was either not known to the public and or divulged to him prior to the confession, and or only things that the killer would have known that was not available to anybody else. Basically, insider information, location of wounds, manner of death, observation of birthmarks, whatever it might be, the use of a particular medication for, whatever purpose. I've been looking for that. And the big detail that the prosecution relies on with respect to these confessions that wouldn't have been known to the general public is the presence of a white van. Now, that may have backfired because that white van, it turns out, didn't belong to Richard Allen. It belonged to this guy, Brad Weber, who had, an incendiary exchange with the defense attorneys in this case that may have opened the door to third-party culpability as the defense begins to present their case to the jury. It's a lot to take in, but let's get into it. Dr. Walla, she says that Richard Allen was under her care, confessed to the murders of Abby and Libby. The defense scrutinizes her credibility from the outset because of her personal interest in the case. You see, it turns out that she's a true crime junkie. And any true crime junkie will have been aware of the Delphi case. It's one of the most famous cases in the true crime world over the last 7 years. People have been talking about it for years. There's been numerous documentaries made about it over the years. People have been prepping for this trial for a period of years. And the fact that she was aware of it kind of compromises her ability to be objective in her role as clinical psychologist. Wouldn't you agree? Isn't that just kind of... At the same time, there's nothing wrong with her being a true crime junkie, but the fact that she admits to it while on the stand is problematic because now she has information about the case that perhaps somebody that wasn't familiar with the case might not have had. Maybe she starts divulging some of the details that she knows about to him, and maybe it influences Allen's investigation just a little bit, to make it more credible that, maybe he actually is. Maybe this is a credible confession. Now, look, there was a comment on my last video, and I want to pull it up because I appreciated the comment, and I believe it comes from a good place, but it asked me specifically a question that I thought deserves an answer. And let me just see if I could find it really quick before I don't completely butcher this. So this person, Chris Worthington, asks, so what is this you hope to achieve putting these videos out? Is it to rile up the public and create backlash, and somehow this will put pressure on the jury or the authorities and it somehow will help free him? Chris Worthington, no, that is not my intent. She says, also, can you show me definitely that he definitely didn't do it? What evidence shows it definitely wasn't him? His alibi, anything at all, says that it couldn't be him. My reply to him was, look, my hope is to inform the public, offering my professional analysis of the evidence and point out strengths and weaknesses of both sides. My analysis is fair and objective, and I believe in transparency in how these trials are conducted. The jury's not supposed to have access to anything on the internet right now anyways. I don't believe that the jurors are scouring the internet for law tube opinions about what's going on in trial. Nobody's sitting there but for maybe a handful of actual reporters and actual YouTubers. I said that it's not the job of the defense team to prove that he didn't do it. You can't really prove a negative. That burden rests with the prosecution. They must raise reasonable doubt, and the state has done a poor job thus far filling the gaps in their case. This is what happens when you have shoddy investigative work and politically motivated charges. In other words, somebody's up for re-election. We got this big case that's been that has been a thorn in our paw for a number of years. Maybe if I implicate a suspect on a modicum of evidence, it would strengthen my ability to get reelected. I speculated before the trial started that that was possibly what was going on, because there was a number of questions. And is that really Richard Allen? So the bridge guy was described as this tall, muscular guy. Richard Allen, I want to say he's like 5'3", 5'4", and he is not muscular under any objective standard. He doesn't look like the stout, healthy-looking guy that was walking down the bridge in that video. Just doesn't. He kind of sort of does, I guess, but the bridge guy was so covered up. I mean, you could argue that that was just about anybody. There's no defining features, and we don't have any experts to testify as to, based from that angle, taken from that distance, with everything, maybe the dimensions of the bridge or something. Nobody used physics to figure out how tall that person would have been in the video, and whether or not it corroborated with the profile of what is known with Richard Allen, at the very least his height. So there's been questions. Look, from the time that Richard Allen was listed as a suspect, had assumed that the prosecution must have some hard evidence on this guy. And I've always believed, until I actually started looking into the strength of the prosecution's case, that he's probably the guy. He probably did it. He effing confessed. I am no different than anybody else. I am swayed by a good confession. If somebody confesses to a crime, I was very much, prior to myself becoming an attorney and working on some of these criminal cases, heavily influenced by the presence of a confession, because it's like, why would you ever confess to something? Not understanding the real psychological trauma that occurs when you are sitting in a prison cell without access to the outside world, without access to your loved ones. I've heard somebody say, oh, but he had an iPad and he could communicate with them through that. Bullshit, he did. Well, I'm not saying bullshit he had an iPad, but I'm venturing to guess that that visitation, whatever privileges he had in that iPad, were probably limited. It probably didn't allow for photographs or videos. It certainly didn't allow for internet access. And what if, his, I just don't know what the parameters were for him to be able to contact family through an iPad. It's not going to fix the idea that you're sitting there isolated from real human contact, from anybody, for an extended period of time in a maximum security prison. And then all the while you're constantly berating him and telling him that he's the guy that did it, using read techniques that have been highly scrutinized for decades now, and say that, well, we got our confession, and then not be able to offer a single solitary detail that wasn't already available in either discovery or offered to the general public. Now, knowing a little bit better as an attorney 11 years in, having tried hundreds of cases, having defended hundreds of individuals just like Richard Allen, I don't put a whole lot of value in those confessions without meeting that very bare minimum of criteria. And the way that they've tried to get around it by Dr. Walla's testimony was, incomplete. They're supposed to close the holes to reasonable doubt. If he offered like, oh, they were posed in such and such a way and there was branches on top of them, or, whatever that wasn't available to the public or in discovery, then it's like, that's pretty compelling. He wouldn't have known that otherwise. Fine, he did it. There's plenty of confessions like that. There's plenty of them. But there are others that fall into this other category where it appears that the confessions were coerced. Brandon Dassey, the Central Park Five, Richard Allen. Think of it. I'm certain that all of you, by virtue of following this case, could probably point to an instance where you are aware of a false confession that was argued by a defense attorney who had been a false confession, where they sold you. It's like, wow, yeah, that's effed up. I could see why he would crack under that pressure. This guy was eating his own feces. He was clearly in a state of mental degradation. And so of what worth are these confessions? I don't know, man. I don't have any ulterior motives here is my point. I am not there present in the courtroom to offer even my firsthand analysis of what's going on. I'm just saying that what is coming out of what the prosecution has tried to do and how they're trying to prove it, it makes me question why they rushed so quickly to charge this man, why they put him in maximum security prison as opposed to county, why they did not focus on other potential suspects when there appears to have been avenues to have done so, i.e. the white van belonging to this Weber character, this Odin theory of their involvement, the multiple persons theory. Were they just looking for a scapegoat here? Were they just looking for the sacrificial lamb? Which, if that's what they were doing, Jesus Christ and WTF, because that could happen if they're willing to do that to a guy like Richard Allen. I don't know, maybe they thought he was harmless. Maybe they thought he already had mental issues. Maybe they thought that he'd be a reasonable target. Maybe they thought that he had the look of somebody that would have done that. If you squint your eyes hard enough, he sort of resembles the bridge guy. Maybe his voice, if he speaks in a whisper, sort of sounds like the audio recordings. I don't know what they thought, man. If they're willing to do that to an innocent man, they're willing to do it to you if circumstances place it in their best interest, and you will be sacrificed. So look, whether or not you think Richard Allen is guilty or innocent, the danger is this. There's constitutional protections in place to try to avoid this kind of witch trial. When they started talking to Richard Allen, he wasn't even Mirandized. Like, excuse me, they had Mirandized him once, and then a period of days goes by. They get a search warrant. They tear up his house. They bring him back into the station. They don't re-Mirandize him, saying that, hey, we're going to use this shit against you at trial. You got a right to an attorney. You got a right to remain silent, all this and that. They Mirandized him before. They don't do it after they actually bring him into the police station to be further interrogated. They have the officer come in and say, oh, but he was free to go. The door was unlocked. But they literally just conducted a search warrant on his house and were screaming in his face that we effing know you did it. And they want you to believe that a reasonable person would conclude that they were free to go? Based off of what? I am shocked that there was not a motion to suppress the interrogations on those grounds. And maybe there was, I don't know. Maybe there was. It's been 7 years of, I don't know how many years they've been litigating this case. Maybe they did try to suppress that based on lack of Miranda. But it's in. And the whole reason that look, you might get frustrated because there are people that you know that are guilty, that you believe that are guilty, and then God damn it, we got to comply with Miranda, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do all these. Yeah, that's designed to protect the public, because if those measures were not in place, and they're just able to run rampant on however they want to coerce a confession from you, then there would be nothing stopping them from, say, tying you up to a chair and waterboarding your ass until they garnered a confession, sort of like how they do in North Korea, for example, in other parts of the world. You should be thankful that there are attorneys out there fighting for those protections, because they're everything. Our justice system isn't perfect, but at the very least, it aims to protect against those injustices. And so, look, I appreciate this comment from Chris Worthington, and I apologize for my rant. Why am I putting these videos out? Because I want people to be informed by people that actually work in this industry and how we evaluate things, how we evaluate evidence, because it's really helpful to understand and know your rights, to know how these trials go, to understand how you may get railroaded in certain instances and know how to defend yourself against the railroading process. I don't know. I just think it's good to be transparent. No ulterior motive. I was fully ready to convict Richard Allen and bury him under the prison if there was evidence that proved him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And really, like I said, all I was looking for is some kind of reliable detail in his confession that nobody else knew about. They didn't do it, man. They didn't present it. But before I get too far into my rant, let me continue. So, look, with Dr. Walla, the confessions, Dr. Walla stated that Alan confessed to details that were not publicly known. She said that, specifically mentioning the use of a white van during the crime. So this detail, according to the prosecution, could only have been known by the killer, supporting the validity of the confession. And then they talk about mental state. She notes that Alan's behavior was erratic, that he appeared to be experiencing psychosis during the period when the confessions occurred. They say that was their attempt to convince the jury that it was a good confession. The defense argues that Dr. Walla's obsessive interest in the case as evidence that she may have unintentionally influenced Alan's confession. It's like that thing. You have this private conversation with somebody close to you, and you're sworn to secrecy, and you tell them up and down, I swear I will never tell another person. And then, maybe you're like playing mediator between this person and somebody else. And then you go speak to this somebody else, and you're sworn to secrecy. You swore to your best friend that you will never tell another soul about what they told you. It's all in confidence. And then just something slips. Because human nature, that's kind of how we're wired. That's how we're built. And so the defense's argument that she might have unintentionally influenced Alan's confession rings true. I suspect in closing arguments, they might use a hypothetical sort of like that. They argue that her actions compromise her objectivity, which I would agree. And potentially tainted the confession's authenticity. And even if she tried to remain objective, like, could you really? If you saw pictures of Abby and Libby in the way that they were posed with all their injuries as they were deceased, and you have a guy that's over here telling you that he did it, and you have law enforcement telling you that this guy did it, he's literally sitting there in a max security prison because everybody thinks that he did it. Could you really be objective to that? Could you get over the emotional trauma of seeing these two beautiful little girls deceased at the hands of a monster? And if you look at Richard Allen, when he's shackled up in his prison garb, as he is in a mentally deteriorated state, wouldn't it be easy to label him as the monster? As a Silence of the Lambs style killer without perhaps the mental acuity and savvy of Anthony Hopkins? I don't know, man. Kind of hard to be objective, if you ask me. I couldn't do it. Maybe she's better than I. Who knows? The defense points out very aptly that Alan's confessions only began shortly after receiving a large portion of the discovery materials, implying a possible connection between exposure to case details and his incriminating statements. How is the prosecution going to fix that one? That little faux pas? Is there even a way to reference on a timeline what Alan had access to with respect to discovery, what it specifically contained in the timing of his confessions? That's difficult. The discovery materials would have contained all of the things not available to the public, but it wouldn't have been comprehensive. And so, but if some of those things, like, for example, the white van, were contained in the discovery, as I suspect they must have been, otherwise, why would the defense be arguing the point? You don't have a smoking gun remnant of an authentic confession. You have doubt as to what Alan knew when he gave the confession to Dr. Walla, to his wife, to his mom, to law enforcement, whoever. They didn't go into the exact content of Alan's confession. only that they included the detail about the white van and that they were made during a time when his mental state was deteriorating, which wouldn't that mean that it further compromises the authenticity of the confession if he did it when he wasn't in his right mind? I don't know. What are we going for here? Like, what is the big point that the prosecution is making in all of this? I fail to see it. So let's go into the specifics that we know. So Walla says Allen confessed while under her care at the Westville Correctional Facility. Prosecution presents the white van detail as a key piece of evidence, implying that only the person responsible for the murders would know about it, suggesting Allen's confession included information beyond general knowledge or publicly available facts. Officer Harshman later testifies that Brad Weber, who lives near the crime scene, owns a white Ford Ecoline van. The prosecution attempts to establish a timeline that places Weber's van near the bridge around the time of the murders. But then wouldn't that mean Weber should have been a suspect? Just off the top of my head. Wouldn't that small detail be a direct connection to a possibly culpable third party that the judge said we couldn't talk about? Has that now opened the door? Well, the defense, while attacking Dr. Walla's credibility, they didn't directly refute the white van detail during her cross. Instead, they focused on discrediting her overall testimony, pointing out that Allen's confession began after a significant proportion of discovery materials had already been disclosed, and suggest a possible alternative explanation that all Allen might have learned by way of the van by way of the discovery, incorporating it into his confessions. And again, there's an extreme lack of specificity into what actually he confessed to. But that's what they said. Let's talk about Brad Weber and his testimony. So this is what he says. He says, he worked at Subaru on February 13, 2017, the day of the murders, with his shift running from 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. He confirmed clocking in at 5:41 a.m., clocking out at 2:02 p.m. that day. And according to his testimony, he drove straight home, with the drive typically taking 20 to 25 minutes. The state introduces a photograph of a white Ford Ecoline van as their Exhibit 311, which Weber identified as his own. This van becomes a central element in the prosecution's case because it corroborates Allen's confession when he mentions a white van at the crime scene. Officer Harshman then testifies that he used Google Maps to estimate Weber's travel time from work to his home. He determined it to be about 20 to 25 minutes. This timeline, if accurate, would place Weber's van near the bridge around the time the girls' cell phones went out of range. And during cross, defense attorney Brad Rossi confronts Weber. This is where I get really frustrated that this trial is not being televised. So Brad Rossi confronts Weber with a previous statement he had given to law enforcement just days after the murders on February 18th of 2017. In his previous statement, Weber claimed he did not go straight home after work, but instead went to work on ATM machines. Weber vehemently denies this previous statement on the stand. He becomes visibly agitated, angry. Due to this inconsistency, Rossi issues Weber a subpoena right there on the stand, indicating that the defense, we're going to be calling this effing guy back up as a witness later, perhaps during their case in chief. And I suspect it might have something to do with third-party culpability. Imagine you're on this jury and you witness this guy, Dr. Weber. Okay, so there was obviously a white van there at the scene. Allen says that he sees it. Whether or not Allen actually saw it, or he got that from the discovery, nobody knows. But Weber admits, oh yeah, that's my car. I drive that car, the same car that I drive. You find out, based on cross-examination, hey, you didn't go straight home, did you? No, I did. I went straight home. Like hell you did. Don't you remember? Isn't it true that back on February 18th, you told the police that you went to go work on some ATM machines? I never said such a thing. That's bullshit. Like hell is bullshit. You told the officers that you were working on ATM machines. And you knew that they were investigating the murder of 2 young girls. You knew that, didn't you? You knew that that was the subject that you were talking about. I had no idea. I knew such a thing. I went straight home. That's my story I'm sticking with. But you told the officer different, didn't you? And you had to see this big confrontation on the stand, this incendiary exchange, and this guy getting super agitated. Is it possible in your mind as a juror that, hey, why didn't we investigate this effing guy? Why is he changing his story on the stand? He just said, we've corroborated through Google Maps. He's got a 20 to 25 minutes. They would have put him at the bridge at the time of the murders or the disappearance or the incident or whatever. And now he's changing his story on the stand. What the fuck? Why is he not a suspect? Why didn't they look into him? Just seeds of doubt that are starting to sprout into branches, that are starting to sprout leaves, that are starting to sprout flowers. If you're on the jury, do you have questions about Weber? Are you buying into this bullshit about this coerced confession from Alan? I'm calling it coerced because it appears to be coerced. And even if it's not coerced, if he's confessing to stuff that's already known, that's not a confession. That's him in a state of mental deterioration, saying things that he thinks that law enforcement wants to hear because they've been telling him for months now. I fucking know that you did. I know that you killed those little girls. Just admit it. You're going to want to get it off your chest. You're going to feel so much better. Look, these families, these girls deserve justice. Their parents deserve justice. They deserve to know what happened to their little girls. Don't you want to help? Look, whatever you did, you did. It's done. It's over with. You can make it all right by at least doing the right thing. Just tell us you did it. We already know. We know you were there. We have a bullet from your gun at the scene of the crime. We got you there. You did it. Just admit it. If you don't admit it, everybody's going to think that you're a monster. Your wife is going to think that you're a monster, even more than she already does. Your wife already thinks that. That poor lady. How dare you withhold this information from us? Confess, 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 over and over and over again for a period of months while he's sitting there in solitary confinement. And you want me to believe in the authenticity of that confession? Fuck off. I apologize for my language, but Jesus Christ. Does not anybody see the problem with that scenario? It's upsetting. I don't know this guy, Richard Allen. I don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy. I couldn't tell you with 100% certainty whether or not he was guilty or innocent. I'm just saying that the burden is on the state to prove to me, to the juror, not to me, to the jurors, that he did this beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they're basing it on the strength of these confessions, I got severe doubts, not reasonables. I got severe doubts as to their authenticity. If that's all you got, you better give me something else. You better fix it. They haven't. They haven't. Let me continue. Weber's demeanor has been described by Andrea Burkhart, who was there in the courtroom every day. She's probably there right now. As explosive. It was almost unhinged in his reaction, which, gosh, I love a good unhinged moment on cross-exam. I gotta say, man, I would have loved to see that reaction. She compares him to characters from the movie Deliverance, implying a sense of unsettling intensity and potential volatility, the kind of guy that might potentially murder a couple of innocent girls. Wouldn't you think? I mean, I don't know who. Dominic, you ever saw that movie Deliverance?
I did not.
Well, for the benefit of your virgin eyes and ears, it's the kind of movie that you only want to watch once. It's not like a rewatchable movie. Like it's like you watch it once, it's highly disturbing. And it'll make it's one of these movies that just kind of make you go, huh. How about that? How about that? But the characters in those movies, if he's explosive like that, that's pretty unsettling. It would paint a picture for me as the kind of person that might be able to commit murders, such as been the subject of this trial for some time now. Burkhart goes on to say that this moment left a strong impression on the jury, raised significant questions about Weber's credibility and potential involvement in the case. I don't know. Dominic, I know you're sitting here, you're listening to me rant. I know you don't know a whole lot about this case, but knowing all of those things, what do you think about this guy's confession?
I mean, based off what you said,
it's hard because it's like one-sided right in here, you know, but I'm trying to be objective. I'm just analyzing the evidence. But if you knew all of that, and I argue that to you, and mind you, there's going to be counter arguments, but what would you think? What would you think?
if I was on the jury, you know, I don't believe there's a, you know, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty. So,
You have doubts.
yeah,
So even if you think he may have done it, not guilty, acquittal in your eyes?
yeah.
Well, there was this curious conundrum with Google search evidence. The prosecution presented Google search evidence at trial. I don't know exactly what was referenced in those Google searches. They lack context and explanation. But there was not any sponsoring witnesses to tell us what was in that evidence. It's been argued that it creates this real danger of misleading the jury into they don't know what they're looking at. What am I looking at? There were Google searches. Was he interested in the Delphi case? Was he interested in this and that? I don't know. But there was no sponsoring witness to tell everybody what this searches were supposed to represent. They were just kind of there to look at it. It's a fundamental principle in evidence that it has to be relevant. It must be authenticated. I can't just hand you text messages and say, here, read that. It'll tell you everything. I need to lay a foundation for text messages. Who on the phone? How did you receive these messages? What time and date did you receive these messages? Where did you receive them from? Was the message that you received, was the number that you received the messages from an actual phone number or a burner phone number or a fake phone number or a whatever phone number? You got to lay brick by brick to understand why evidence is relevant, why it should be admissible. The fact that that didn't happen with these Google searches, I don't know what that is about. In the case of these Google searches, it's been indicated that the prosecution never established a foundation for it, linking the searches to Richard Allen or demonstrating their relevance to the case. They just handed printed copies to the jury without demonstrating how or why they are connected to Allen, leaving a gaping hole in the evidentiary chain that we're supposed to rely upon to have meaningful trials. There's going to be instructions to the jury, I'm sure, to consider only evidence that was presented in court and avoid speculation. But in the absence of context and explanation, human nature dictates that jurors might attempt to fill in the gaps themselves. And so there's looking at these Google searches and just, here, look at that. Whatever you think about that. Isn't that just inviting speculation? The prosecution's approach deprives the defense of a fair opportunity to challenge the authenticity of the searches, of the evidence, or to offer just the ability to cross-examine, inquire about methods used to collect them, present counter evidence to rebut. But the jury just gets to look at it. I don't understand that portion of the trial. I wish that I was there to see how that all went down, because none of that makes sense. I don't get it. I don't get it. So look, here we are. Could we talk about the strength of the prosecution's case? As they have rested this is what I have is the strength of their case. They're relying heavily on the confessions, obviously. We've talked at length about what I think about the confessions, but they're focusing on, it's not just one confession. It was a multitude of incriminating statements, not isolated to one instance or one individual. It was to a multitude of people. It was a multitude of confessions. He said this multiple times over different time periods. Referred to recorded phone calls, video recordings of conversations that Allen had, and claims that he confessed to fellow inmates and during therapy sessions with Dr. Walla to his wife. The abundance and variety of sources could be seen as perhaps strengthening the prosecution's arguments that the confessions were not merely the result of Reed technique coercion. They're going to rely on Dr. Walla's expert opinion. The prison psychologist, that was their expert witness, despite the defense's multiple attempts to undermine her credibility, they're going to argue that her professional opinion that Allen confessed to her during therapy sessions was an authentic confession. I guess. They're going to rely on the unspent bullet that we had talked about that was found near the victims' bodies, arguing that it came from a Sig Sauer P226 pistol, the same type of firearm owned by Richard Allen. They're going to rely on forensic expert testimony that's been presented so far, indicating that it came from Richard Allen's gun. Problem with that is they haven't been able to replicate the marks in their independent tests. So how much is that really worth? We got the bridge guy video, photographic evidence, captured. I mean, everybody knows about the bridge guy video. They're going to say that, it resembles him, I guess. They must. It's never been offered as conclusive proof, though, as definitely being Richard Allen. There's been problems with the eyewitness testimony in that they can't agree on a description for the guy. The only, reliable evidence we have is the video of bridge guy. Problem is, the eyewitnesses were all over the place as to be, so what do we do with that? They're going to rely on the Google searches, the phone data, saying that maybe he had an uncanny interest in the Delphi murders, but, maybe he was a true crime junkie. I don't know. Maybe he was just interested in a high-profile case that was the subject of a place of where he lives in close proximity. I don't know. They're going to try to use his phone data as corroboration, placing him in the vicinity of the crime scene to corroborate details from his alleged confession. But there's been challenges and arguments made against the accuracy and the interpretation of phone data. Is that enough to get over the hump of establishing beyond a reasonable doubt? I have heard that the prosecution, during opening statements, spun an incredibly compelling narrative about what they thought happened to those two girls. Burkhart says that they presented a strong and emotionally compelling narrative during their opening statements, connecting the dots between the evidence and Allen's alleged actions. That's it. That is kind of the strength of the case. They had a good opening statement. It seems like they failed to deliver. It's one thing to tell a good story, but you got to support it with stuff. Now, here is the strength of the defense. The defense's case, obviously they're going to argue coerced confessions. I've talked for like a good 45 minutes about why I think that these confessions are not authentic. If you don't have the confessions, then what do you have? Where's the physical evidence? There's a lack of DNA evidence. There's not been any kind of physical evidence directly connecting Allen to the murders. The disputed ballistics evidence, they're relying heavily on this unspent bullet found near the victims. And the defense is obviously and correctly challenged its reliability, citing that you haven't been able to repeat the marks on that gun in the first place. There's issues with how the ballistic evidence was recovered, the scientific methods used to test, and otherwise. Enough to maybe perhaps raise just enough doubt that perhaps we shouldn't be relying on this ballistics evidence, whatever it is. There were discrepancies in witness descriptions, lack of identification, conflicting witness statements, no positive identifications. The eyewitnesses couldn't even walk into court and identify Richard Allen as the guy that they saw. What do you do with that? What do you even do with that? They now have an avenue towards third-party culpability. What do you think about this white van character, the guy that had the explosive exchange? Has that now opened the door to open the eyes to the jury that perhaps Richard Allen wasn't the guy? Now, they might not be able to get into the Odin theories. They might not be able to get into all of that. But prior, for the last 7 years, those theories have been floating around. I sincerely doubt they're coming in now, but, it would be something to argue if it gets in. There's holes. There's holes. There's holes. There are at least 5 avenues towards reasonable doubt that the defense could rely upon in closing arguments. They're supposed to be presenting their case. The state is just rested. And so we'll see what happens. I don't think that they're going to have Richard Allen testify. I would not put that guy on the stand for any reason. The guy literally confessed to crimes. He can't handle the pressure. I don't know what he's like, but there's no good reason to put him on the stand with the way that the case is going right now. He should exercise his Fifth Amendment right to sit there and observe the trial. So I'll just say, if the state chose to just simply rest and not put on any evidence going forward and just go straight to closing arguments, I would think that they have a really high probability of securing an acquittal in this case. Now, I'm certain that they have strategically lined up witnesses to capitalize on Weber's testimony, on Dr. Walla's testimony, on some of these inconsistencies. Some perhaps counter experts are going to come in and weigh in. I don't know how far we're going to get with that, but I'd venture to say that they have a compelling case in defense that they want to advance and that they're going to go for it. So we will see how that goes. It's going to be, I don't know what's going to happen. All I'm going to say is this. From my perspective, I have rarely seen trials that are this high profile, that have been investigated for this long, where there is this much rampant reasonable doubt. Usually reasonable doubt cases are, you got to squint a little bit. It's like, okay, maybe there's an alternative explanation or whatnot. But in this case, it just appears that you don't have to look very hard to have doubts about whether or not Richard Allen is the guy. You might not like him. You might not like the way that he looks. You might think that he looks like the kind of guy that commits such a crime. You might think that he fits the prosecution's narrative, but you cannot deny the holes in the prosecution's case, and they've done little to nothing to combat those holes. And the attempts that they've tried to use to fill in the gaps have raised further questions. Literally, their theory on how they were going to get over the authenticity of the confessions was to introduce this white van theory, and it opened up potential for third-party culpability. That's not hitting the mark. That is a counter to what they were trying to do. So for what it's worth, in my opinion, the prosecution is embarrassing themselves. It appears that there's something fishy going on over there in that courtroom. I don't know what it is, but something ain't right over there. I wish we were able to watch this in real time. Unfortunately, we have what we have. So we'll see where this goes. I'm going to be following this very closely all week. This is going to dominate a lot of the content on my show for the foreseeable future. I promise I'm going to be covering the Sarah Boone, wrapping up her conviction and all of that, closing arguments. I will offer my analysis of that. I have a lot to say, but it's not more important than this Delphi case at this point in time. There's something foul going on over there, and I'd like to ferret it out if possible. So look, that's all I got for Delphi today. For the rest of you, I'm about to jump into some family law after dark. I'm going to be joined by Bruce from Oregon, by Melissa, and maybe a few others. We will see, but it's going to be a wild one. So Dominic, if you haven't already done so, could you drop the link to Flat over there in the comments? I will see you guys over there. If you guys can't find it for whatever reason, just simply go to my channel. It's going to be scheduled to start. Join me over there, and we're going to have a good time doing some family law after dark. I love you all, and have a wonderful weekend. Be safe out there. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.